Fernando, I just wanted to let you know it's a minute after one.
Yep.
Fernando is driving, so to the degree that I'm going to help him facilitate
Thank you.
this meeting, that he needs it, I certainly will. We have about 25 people currently in the meeting. No, we have 30 participants. Wow, we got two screens. This is fantastic. That's great. Rapidly approaching 35, 40 members joining today to the joint meeting of the Science and Technical Work Group and the Mitigation Work Group. Um, so Fernando, or I also saw um, obviously Michael Powell, and it's hard to follow and follow everything on the screen here. So
Kim
if we,
Coble.
yeah, oh, thank you. And Kim Coble's here. Thanks, Kim. So the leaders
Outstanding.
of the MWG are here on the call with us, Fernando.
Great. So let me just say a few words, welcoming everybody. Great to have you in this one-of-a-kind meeting that we're really happy to have. And I think in order to streamline and make best use of the time, um, can we skip introductions? Is that okay? I mean, I know it's good to introduce people, but this is a very big meeting, and we can just move directly into the agenda, and maybe the chair of the MWG group can say a few words just to get us started as well.
Yeah, there's hands up that we could skip introductions. Most people have their names on the screen.
Perhaps
So I think
just
we
put
could.
in the chat which group we're from.
Right. Great. And yeah, and if that's a good idea, Rob, and if folks want to kind of identify their name and their affiliation in the chat, that would be helpful also for our note taking associated with this meeting. The meeting is being recorded as well. And so Michael and or Kim, if you guys want to make some opening remarks.
I don't think really, other than thank you guys for hosting us.
Yep, that'll do it.
All right. So let's move right into the main content of the meeting.
That might be my cue. And I hope I don't learn to regret getting these two rowdy work groups together for a juicy topic. But MDE, so Mark Stewart, Climate Change Program Manager at MDE, and on my suggestion, I thought it would be good to get these groups together for laying some early groundwork for some long-term considerations for the state's efforts to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions. And despite the fact that our net zero emissions goal won't arrive for another 20 years, it's very important that we begin now thinking about and confirming the framework that we all think about when we say, what does it mean for Maryland to achieve net zero emissions? Because there have been some questions since we released the climate plan in 2023 about what exactly are our boundaries, where would these investments take place, what's the most cost-effective path for Maryland, or perhaps, and frankly, this conversation could be broadened generally to states. What should this look like as states think about net zero emissions? So I can frame up a conversation. But my hope here is really and all I'm really offering is to bring to this group some questions and looking for your input. And this is frankly both we're looking for the scientific and the political perspectives on these matters, because some of the issues are really rooted in both. So with that, and I gave, I was here with the STWG, and thank you, Fernando, for inviting me back after I kind of started to lay the groundwork for this at some point. So I'm going to share screen on something that I shared with the STWG before, certainly something that the MWG members have seen before, which is our climate plan. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. And I want to note as I'm pulling this up that, we were we are really grateful to have partners at the University of Maryland Center for Global Sustainability that supported our development of the climate plan and did the modeling that supports the climate plan. And I certainly welcome them. I see Professor Holtman and others from that team here with us today. So welcome their insights into, some of the modeling considerations that I want to share with you. But one of the things that I wanted to point out that I think I've teased with both the groups before, when we released the climate plan, which was really an attempt to show what is the lowest cost option for Maryland to achieve its emission reduction goals, which includes a 60% reduction in gross emissions by 2031 from our 2006 baseline and net zero emissions by 2045. And what you see in this on the right side of the screen under this current and planned policies scenario is what we call the goal achievement scenario. So you see the emissions coming down, the sources of emissions in the state coming down pretty dramatically over the next couple of decades, and being balanced by forestry and land use and CO2 removal to achieve net zero emissions in 2045 and beyond. Actually, we go a little, carbon negative by 2050 under this model. So one of the things that we all learned through this modeling activity was that we see this CO2 removal come in starting in the model at least around 2035 and becoming, a pretty significant sink for carbon emissions to achieve our 2045 goal. And my very lay explanation for this is that the model built that out because it was cheaper, it was lower cost to build out that CO2 removal in Maryland in those later years than to squeeze the additional emission reductions from the remaining sources of emissions, right? So that's roughly speaking how the model works, and we have the modeling experts here who can correct what I'm saying now. But some stakeholders in response to those findings suggested, well, if CO2 removal technologies, and there's kind of a broad category of these things, but one that's been kind of popularized in media is like direct air capture technology, devices that are typically electrically driven that are pulling CO2 out of the ambient air. That's one example of a CO2 removal technology, and people have questioned if that were to be deployed anywhere on Earth, does it make most sense to deploy it in Maryland? And I think that there's a scientific answer to that, which I'm very eager to hear from the group here. And I think some of the literature suggests that type of technology is typically most likely best deployed in areas that have abundant renewable energy, fairly cheap and abundant renewable energy. And again, scientists here, feel free to correct that record in terms of how the IPCC has been thinking about, that. But the questions that we received about, is this really Maryland's future with building CO2 removal and a significant amount in the state? Should some of that be built perhaps beyond the state's borders? What does it mean for Maryland to contribute to carbon reduction projects or CO2 removal technologies developed beyond the state's borders and account for that within the state's zero emissions framework and our zero emissions goal attainment? And frankly, as many of you can understand, this opens up a whole can of worms into the idea of where emission reductions should occur and how to credit the state's actions toward that. And there are different models for this. I mean, one thing that I'll point out, the way that we do our emissions inventory, we are essentially looking at all of the emissions that occur within the geographic boundaries of the state, and then adding in emissions associated with our electricity generation. Because of that, in part, when we have an RPS policy where some of the renewable energy that we use here as Maryland to, you know, meet our renewable energy goals. Some of that renewable energy is produced out of state, right? So we currently have, as one, you know, example of a policy where we allow Maryland investments to go outside of the geographic boundaries of the state in order to achieve some of our environmental goals. So there's a little bit of a framework for that, if you want to think of it that way. But as we approach our 2030 deadline, so the statute requires MDE to produce the state's final net zero emissions plan in 2030, which means that probably in 2028, certainly by 2029, we will be engaging in the effort to develop our model to find the lowest cost pathway for Maryland to achieve its net zero emissions goal. If there's any thinking about the boundaries that we would use in that modeling activity, and especially if any of that thinking would lead to changes in law so that we have a different statutory direction and framework to use, the window of opportunity to change things in statute is really the next few years before we would begin on that modeling activity, and again, possibly 2028. So that's why, you know, this, in some ways, this is a very future thinking conversation about, you know, what net zero emissions means and, you know, achieving it in 20 years. On the other side, we're really just a few years away from really needing to figure out what that means for our development of the state's final net zero emissions plan. So I just threw a whole lot out there. Perhaps maybe we start with, are there any kind of clarifying questions or comments that people have with kind of my framing of the issue? Okay.
Yeah, I don't think any questions, just more of an encouraging comment that even though it seems like it's time away that we have to do this, it's good to start thinking about this now and start acting now. So I encourage that.
Well, thanks for starting with an encouraging comment.
I don't see any questions to that, to your framing, but
yeah, let me just ask a clarifying question. Agriculture didn't appear on there except the green for land use, is that right?
Yeah, so we agriculture does actually show up essentially in two parts of our inventory and in our plan. So that light green part that shows on the sources side are sources of agricultural emissions. And then in our forestry and land use, carbon sinks. There, of course, is some carbon sequestration in, you know, soils, and that shows up in our forestry and land use sinks side of it.
Okay. Was N2O in your budget?
Yes. And, you know, before I go on, I do want to give an opportunity to Nate Holtman or Kathleen Kennedy. Yeah, almost everything I just talked about was really their effort in doing this modeling. Almost certainly I messed up something about describing the model. So CGS team, is there anything that you'd like to add before we dive into the long-term net zero framework considerations?
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Fernando and others for convening today. Real quick, I mean, Mark, that is very helpful. I also think we'd love to open up as quickly as possible to the full group to get input on this. So I also, in addition to us doing this, I'm going to pitch over to Kathleen to talk about the Maryland work, but just kind of as a note, I also have been involved in this on the federal side. So I led the writing of the U.S. long-term strategy in 2021. And this question always comes up of how to deal with what is a difficult to predict technology and CDR in particular, but then how it also interplays with kind of everything else in the economy and how we might think about doing prioritization of things that are changing in like 2040, 2045, and how we kind of think about that, including like, industries in certain contexts and other types of like longer term decarbonization strategies. And so those things are challenging to predict, and they're also challenging to think about in a policy context. So I think that's why it's doubly valuable for us to be, and again, thanks to Team Maryland for like starting to think about those questions early on. And I think getting this group input will be very helpful. And then also as we do that, to think about what are the implications for an actual strategy to get there. And there will be then some learning that we can do as a state in the next few years about what might need to be catalyzed, what might need to be put in motion so that we can actually get those mid 2030s into 2040s changes in motion enough so that we can get them to deliver by 2045. So that's kind of how I would sort of add to the framing. And then just real quick over to Kathleen, any comment on the modeling?
Yeah, thanks. I think you gave a pretty great overview, Mark. I would just add two small nuances. One, that there were a couple pieces like agriculture, for instance, that were analyzed outside of the GChem model. And so that's a little bit outside of that least cost framework you were mentioning because there's no direct cost comparison there. And then the other piece is that the modeling did include a small amount of carbon capture within Maryland's borders that was in electricity sector and for cement specifically. So that scenario did include some carbon capture already built in that would be within Maryland's borders. And that's something to consider as this part of framework as well.
Yeah, this is Bob Rudd. I don't see a raised hand feature, but you have to talk about where you're going to store it, and storing it within Maryland might be a challenge. Or are you going to put it in a pipeline and send it somewhere else where they'll store it? I would like to hear what the options are there.
Well, there is some basalt in Maryland, so that is an option. And there is a raised hand. I guess I should use it.
Where is it? Help me on the raised hand bit.
Might be just simply raising your hand and it
Yeah.
That works too. Under
That works too. Yeah, that. But go ahead, Don, if you wanted to touch on that.
At the risk of getting ahead of ourselves a little bit in the discussion, on the capture and storage issue, let's agree for the moment that it shouldn't be bound and probably is going to have to be out of state somewhere. And the question then comes, who pays for it? You talk about, Kathleen talked about cement and power generation. Well, those they can pay for that part of it. But, in 2025, the biggest sources are, if I remember correctly, are transportation and waste management. Did you guys think of a mechanism by which those sources that are still emitting actually pay for the capture and storage? Or how does that work in the cost estimation or feasibility analysis?
The climate plan does lay out some different revenue generating policies to be able to show an investment pathway to some of these new technologies and investments that may be needed to achieve net zero emissions. That's still a work in progress to think about the right policy approach there.
Is this the public sector then paying for it, or raising taxes or fees, or how does that? Is that we haven't decided yet?
Yeah, we continue to be open to input on that.
Yeah.
And I saw Michael Powell put up his real hand.
Yeah, I think, and it actually did trigger on the screen, but when I put my hand down, my hand came down. But I think that's a very valid question, and I think transportation is the thing that most stands out. I think realistically, we're not going to get the General Assembly to impose an additional gas tax or something like that. I mean, they are going the opposite direction, and we're not going to achieve. I can preview the model. We're not going to achieve the kind of reductions in transportation and electric vehicles that the modeling originally called for by 2030. So you are going to have significant transportation emissions. If you're trying to offset those and politically a gas tax is out of reach, then I think looking at it is going to necessarily involve how in the world do you capture transportation emissions? And I don't have an answer to it, but I think it signals what a huge effort this is. I do think it's that in order to avoid being so chagrined by the scope of the problem that we do nothing, we probably just need to focus on how do we account for storage outside so we can decide how much the credits are. And then as a separate question, decide how we pay for it, because one is more of a political question, unfortunately, and the other one is clearly primarily a scientific question, but that's merely a suggestion for how to approach it.
Donald Goldberg, did you want to speak up? No? Okay.
Hey.
Russell and then Adele.
It's just Elliot Campbell put into the chat. There is a plan from the Maryland Geological Survey for sequestration out west. So
yeah, with regional partners. Yeah. Adele.
Quickly.
Go ahead, Elliot, if you want to touch on that. I mean, I saw the chat.
Yeah, so there's quite a bit of potential sequestration capacity, but it would not be cheap to access it. It's quite deep. It's located offshore, a tremendous amount of it is. So again, Maryland's probably not the most efficient place to access geologic sequestration.
Thanks. Adele?
Yeah, just a quick wondering type question. A few years ago, Secretary of Energy from Denmark gave a talk here at the University of Maryland, and and our sort of deputy secretary was here, and I got up and asked the question whether for the small European states or even Scandinavian states, if we have actually looked at GDP of some of the small states such as Maryland and Northeast states, compare the GDP and public transportation ratios between those countries and our individual states, whether we actually are putting our efforts in that direction. So my point is, we can tax everything out and so on. I am not against taxing for environmental benefits, but my point is, fundamental thing is not really being considered by our policy makers. That's what I am reaching at. In other words, we don't have enough public transportation. As an example, we have a shuttle that comes from Columbia. University of Maryland has put, I take the bus in the morning. Yeah, it is not convenient. It stops almost 25 minutes away, so I have to walk even that 25 minutes. But my point is, we need to think, I think our policymakers, we need to push them to think in those directions as well. And so that I thought that I will just bring that up. Thank you.
Well, thanks for this input so far. And Dave, I wonder, kind of zooming out, and this is both perhaps, Nate Holman was talking earlier about how this is a conversation that's certainly not unique to Maryland. I wonder if anyone has perspectives on how other states and nations are thinking about this net zero emissions framework, and also, the scientific perspective, which I imagine is, climate change is a global issue. These are global pollutants that we're talking about, and what matters is global reduction. And what does that mean, that bringing that scientific framework into this consideration about what does it mean at the state level to achieve net zero emissions? Should there be an openness to thinking about reductions that would occur caused by state action, but beyond the state's borders? So anyhow, any reflections on either of those points?
Robert Wright?
Yes, I think I don't know about a plan, but in terms of storage, I think if you knew somebody in Wyoming, as far as I know, they're the most advanced in terms of carbon capture and storage. And it's not, talking about pipelines to come into Wyoming and capture in Wyoming. So if you want to reach out to someone, I suggest you reach out to Wyoming.
Thanks. And I do when to me, this issue of direct air capture or carbon capture and storage is perhaps on face value one of the reasons why we're talking about this, because we saw some of that come out in the modeling. But I do want to just daylight that some of the implications of this conversation could also mean investments in afforestation, in carbon reduction projects, energy efficiency projects, renewable energy projects, right? Like the whole suite of mitigation and sequestration measures, and really calling into question, there is a certain cost efficiency in deploying those in some areas versus others. Is it a consideration for the state as we consider the lowest cost pathway for Maryland to contribute to this goal of net zero emissions globally and to achieve our statutory requirements of net zero emissions for Maryland? Is it the right approach that and our current approach, to be clear, is that means net zero emissions within the geographic boundaries of the state of Maryland, adding in any emissions associated with imported power, right? Is that the right framework for Maryland or another state to think about, to use as we develop our net zero emissions plan? Just trying to daylight that I think the question is it should be bigger than just thinking about like the CO2 removal and carbon storage question.
Yeah, Mike Powell's got his hand up.
Can I try to rephrase, I think, what Mark is saying and say, I mean, it seems to me that the question is, can we achieve net zero using the current inventory scheme where we do not include any way for providing credits for carbon reduction outside the state border unless it's energy generation? I mean, that's what we've got right now. The accounting is entirely what happens within the state except for electricity consumption. And so I think the scientific question is it feasible to reach net zero that way? And if it's not, then we've got to come up with a scheme for how to account for carbon reduction outside the state. And so then we would go to a second question, which is how do we properly account for that? And that will be I think an initial step, a scientific technical question, but then it'll move into political issues of how we structure it. But it seems to me the threshold issue is the one Mark is raising, which is 2030 is net zero feasible unless we start including some carbon sinks out of state in some manner.
Thanks for that framing, Mike. And also, I don't imagine we're going to reach a conclusion to these questions today. Right. So I'm just as interested in your thoughts on the process that the state could use to seek the answers, that input on these answers, as I am on your perspectives on those answers themselves.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar to that, Mark. Is that I think perhaps the way I'm seeing the purpose of today's conversation being one of many, right, that we're going to be having, is to start framing these issues. I don't think we're going to find answers today or anywhere near in time. I also wanted to highlight that as part of the 2025 recommendations that our group put forward, we articulated one of the recommendations to update the impacts of climate change on Maryland, but including potential policies like net zero and its implications on across sectors in Maryland, right? And it is not completely aligned with what we're discussing today, but also it recognizes the fact that answering these questions. It's and I think what we propose is like a 2-year study. So it's something, that has that time scale. And I think that's the time scale it's going to take us to reach answers to the questions that we're posing today.
Yeah. Kim?
Thanks, Dave. Great conversation. And I agree with everything. Also want to make sure that we put a pin in the fact that we need to achieve all the reductions in state that we can, right? So we don't want to build a system or a model where what we're doing is not reducing our own footprint, but rather just continuing to buy out of state reductions. We're going to need both, but we got to keep that balance right.
Mark, I don't see any other questions or comments at this time.
Okay, well then I will unmute to say, Kim, great point. Great party last night. The LCV's annual event was last night, so kudos to Kim and her team for an excellent event. And yeah, sorry, I'm just taking notes as people are talking.
So Mark, were you seeking input on anything else at this point?
Yeah, I recognize it's a big question with gnarly answers. So I guess any other thoughts on process? I think because it's a big conversation, MD, we would certainly welcome your thoughts and support on how to facilitate a conversation around this to help us find collective answers to these questions.
Yeah, Don?
Yeah, Mark, I was just going back and looking at the graphs you showed, Nate's group prepared and so on. And one of the things that sticks out to me is that we're not counting on many reductions at all coming from waste management. And I wonder whether that is a source where we could think harder about that and in ways that could find some emissions reductions there. Because at the end of the day, 2050, it's mostly waste management and transportation, and transportation assumes a big reduction, energy production big reduction, but waste management not so much.
Yeah, and Kathleen, remind me, I think one of the things that was happening in waste management, we modeled the impact of our landfill regulations. So that's in our current policies scenario. But is it the case that presumed investments under, a cap and invest policy or another revenue generating policy, waste is outside of the model, so there were not necessarily investments that were deployed in the waste sector? Or was it that additional waste sector measures are too expensive, so the model built the CO2 removal instead?
There was some assumed investment in wastewater emissions specifically. So there are some small reductions there. The primary reductions in waste were the landfill regulations. And then there was also some additional diversion efforts in the landfill category to try to just move things prevent them from getting to the landfill in the first place.
Is that kind of waste minimization?
Right, or
We're
diverting to some other system like composting, etc.
Not producing as much waste to begin with.
Right.
I mean, that's what.
And I think Nate wants to add to that.
Yeah, thanks. Great question. Let me thank you for the question and for the identifying that as an important question for us. And building on Kathleen's points, let me also add, in the broader scientific and sort of policy economic context, some of the potential reductions as we get out in the out years are we've studied those less in the scientific community. And there are people on this call, by the way, who have studied them more. So I'm just saying, as a broad thing, for example, it is kind of a evolving area in our understanding in the kind of larger community about how we are going to identify and then eliminate or gradually dramatically reduce, for example, methane emissions. It's been something that many people in the science community have known about for a long time. So credit where credit is due, but it's only kind of percolated into the policy community, really, I would say, in the last like sort of 5 years. And one of the kind of quirky things is that our understanding of the technologies for doing methane mitigation as a global community is still only kind of okay, and our understanding of how the costs for those technologies might evolve, particularly in the 2030s and 40s, is actually, I believe, pretty conservative in the sense that we haven't fully kind of understood the opportunities for innovation in those spaces. And that's innovation in specific widgets and technologies, but it's also, I think, per Don's point, innovations in process and other kinds of approaches that could be taken in a deliberate way to reduce those types of emissions. So if we're thinking of like a larger agenda, for some people on this call might be already in that and excited about that, there are some interesting interlinkages between, frankly, questions on the frontier of what we really know about application in non-CO2s in particular, to how we get to those net zero goals in the 2040s. So that's just more of a color commentary. It's more like moving away a little bit from a specific policy by policy assessment. But for example, a lot of the modeling up until very recently was driven by EPA MAC curves on non-CO2s, including methane. And this is not to dunk on the MAC curves, because the team was trying and doing a pretty good job on that over at EPA. But in the end, it was a much less refined way to look at technological change in those non-CO2 spaces. So as we're thinking about the science and tech and the kind of inputs in this more open conversation here, I just thought I might throw that in because it's an area that there could be some parallel or other types of workflows or research that kind of can feed into that, not just for Maryland, but for US and global too.
Great.
All right. Well, the optimist in me heard that we can hope for more waste management reductions as we actually in the real world approach 2045. All right. Well, here's my big question then. Oh, go ahead.
Russ Dickerson's got.
Oh, I just concerning methane. I agree. We don't really have the answers yet, but the potential looks like it's there. If we fly our research aircraft around landfills in Maryland, there is tremendous variability in how much methane escapes from one landfill to another. So we're looking into this more. So I think there's still low-hanging fruit to be harvested from landfill operations and from composting. So some reason to be optimistic.
Great. Mark, you wanted to?
Yeah, well, my big question, and I suppose my final question for the group are, where do we go, and how do we go forward from here? Who can facilitate, a conversation about this, and who's the right group of stakeholders? Is it continued conversation between the MWG and the STWG? Are there additional voices that should be included in this conversation? And do you have any thoughts on who would be a good facilitator, recognizing that, I think the window to think about, is there any change in our net zero emissions framework that we'd want to take on? if that led to legislation, right? If that led to changes in the way that emissions and our goals are defined in statute, the opportunity there is to make legislative updates, arguably in 2027 or 2028 at the latest, before we really need to begin in on developing the state's final net zero emissions plan. That really creates 2026 roughly as the window of opportunity to have some conversation around this if there were going to be a legislative piece to this in 2027. So among the reasons we were forcing this conversation to happen as early as possible. So anyhow, welcome to any thoughts now or after today's meeting about how that conversation should go, and who might be willing to help facilitate it.
Great. So one thing I'll say, Mark, and thanks for framing it that way, and just brainstorming here. I think these two groups or this enhanced group can serve as a nucleus to start assembling that conversation, right? Also, UMCES, we started, probably some of you have heard about this. We've started our global laboratory, which is an approach and a facility designed specifically for things like this, and we'd be happy to offer ourselves as hosts and collaborators for this purpose.
Mark, just listening to the conversation today, Mike raised this question of, by the rules we play with, by the law, we can't count out of state negative emissions. We can only count positive emissions if we import the power. Kim made also the point, well, let's not get over to the point where we promise to solve all of our problems out of state. We need to kind of rationalize that. The gentleman from MGS talked a little bit about the physical reality of storage capacity in Maryland. So it seems to me if we bring those things together, it's a first order question that you posed, was how much should we be depending on out of state negative emissions, right? And so that's something I think has both a political, policy and planning thing, but it also has a scientific part that's important. That is the physical capacity of the state to store it. So I mean, that seems to me sort of a first order question, which then can lead to the kind of policy reconsiderations that you mentioned. I see Mike nodding.
Yeah. That's what I had in mind. It seems to me that the first question is, are my naive layman assumption that we can't get there relying solely on carbon sinks in state correct? And I'll defer to the experts, and you guys are the experts on that's true. If we answer that, then I think the second thing I would seek is, okay, how would we, from a technical scientific standpoint, assuming we find solution to the political issues, which are momentous issues, but let's just set those aside for a minute. How do we measure the carbon sink capacity? What time frames, what types of technology will we give credit to? Those kinds of questions, because I can sit down and start trying to imagine how we rewrite a statute to do something, but at this point, one, I'm not going to get any traction unless I say this is the only way to get there, or at least the only feasible way to get there. And then secondly, how would we do any of the measurements, even if we have the political framework? So those first two issues, I think, are essential. And Mark's got the problem that he's got to write down a plan that says how you do this in the next couple of years. And so I think those are the issues I would start with.
Mark, you're not alone. We'll write the plan with you.
Yeah. And Elliot and then Robert.
Thanks, Fernando.
Thanks. So I'm not actually with MGS, but I work at DNR in the same department is MGS. So their analysis, they looked at there's potentially 102 years of storage capacity for emissions in the state. But that's really just theoretical capacity. It would be much more expensive to do that in our state compared to other places in the country. I think both from the geologic availability, those storage areas are very deep, so it'd be expensive to pump the CO2 down that far. And then I think we need to think about the cost to build the energy capacity to do that pumping, right? Because we showed in that graph, looking at very little of it was fossil fuel CO2 removal. It's coming from the transportation waste sector. So at least in my understanding, you'd have to actually do direct air capture to pull that CO2 out of the atmosphere and then pump it down to be sequestered. And that, as I'm sure folks know, is extremely expensive. It costs about $400 per metric ton of CO2 equivalent to do that right now. I'm sure the price will come down in the future, but I think there's a limited ability to do that. So I think we need to combine the technical, just kind of our theoretical capacity with the cost considerations, and does it make sense to do it in the state from that perspective?
All right, what I want to say is 15 years in the past, the Department of Energy had what was called regional carbon sequestration partnerships. And there was one for the Midwest, and somebody from the University of Maryland joined it. The lead for that was Nirad Gupta at Battelle Memorial Institute in Columbus. And they made estimates at that time of the storage potential in Maryland. So before you go off and do new studies, I would suggest you contact Battelle and Niraj and see what you can resurrect from what they did 15 years ago.
Well, all of this input's been very helpful for me. Dave, I do acknowledge, I think that there were some perhaps other agenda items that you all had today.
Yeah, we are going to continue on. Thank you for members of the MWG for joining today. We were going to move on and have a meeting of the STWG for the remainder of the time. And it was really great that we had such a terrific showing from the MWG on a time that we didn't really vet. So I just really thank Kim and Michael and the whole MWG group for making this such a priority to be here.
Thank you,
It's
guys.
wonderful. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Keep up
Thank
the
you.
good
Thank you.
work, you guys.
Great.
Yeah, see you in a couple of weeks.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. So for the Fernando, the next agenda item, I'll just read it out, is updates, and actually, Jared, if you could do this, updates from the Maryland Commission on Climate Change, and where we ended up so far, and how much more we have to go through to get toward a final report.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for that wonderful discussion. That was really great to be a part of. And now we can move on to some of the commission business. So let me share my screen, and then I'll talk you through what we've accomplished so far.
Do you have that ability? Oh, you do.
I do.
Good.
I do. Okay. So we can all see the screen. Yeah.
If you can make it bigger. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
That's
Great.
great.
So this is going to be distributed out to the commission this afternoon. So these are our recommendations as we left them at the September 16th meeting in preparation for the October 1st meeting, where we'll continue this deliberation. So we had 16 recommendations that were submitted by the 4 active working groups and one by individual commissioners that within that total of 16. And we got through half of them in that first meeting, which is really, really great progress. In that meeting, we got through the Adaptation and Resiliency Working Group, the Education, Communication, and Outreach Working Group, and one recommendation by the Mitigation Working Group. So I'll just give a quick summation of what passed, what didn't pass, and the amendments for those that did pass, and then we can continue on with the STWG meeting. So starting with the ARWG, their first recommendation on an update to the Climate and Health Profile report, that did pass. There was an amendment added from the initial text, which is just this little bit at the end here, where they wanted to include a due date. So that report is being recommended to be updated. Then there was the Next Generation Adaptation Plan Public Tracker. This passed without any amendments. Same for the Enhanced Flood Risk Disclosures Amendment. There was a fourth recommendation from the ARWG that did not pass. And this recommendation, I think, was considered to be something that the commission is going to reevaluate maybe next year. And remind myself which recommendation this was. This was for piloting the inclusion of community liaisons in state adaptation projects. So that was something that I think the commission might come back and look at again next year. Moving on to the Education, Communication, and Outreach Working Group. They had 3 that were submitted, 2 of which passed. The first was continuous improvement and accountability in climate action. This called for the climate implementation plans that were required by the governor's executive order last year to just continue on and to build on the success of those programs and incorporate some existing public-facing communications and stakeholder input as well. This was amended from the initial suggestion, which was meant to be another executive order, as the secretary, who is also the co-chair of the commission, is also the chair of this governor's subcommittee on climate. I think that the chair is going to then bring that back and direct the state agencies to take this action into consideration, as opposed to coming from the governor himself. And their next recommendation was to further a bill on making Maryland Climate Education Month official, as opposed to just a proclamation from the governor's office, as it's been the past couple of years. No amendments here. This passed very smoothly. I'm really excited about this one personally, and I hope that it continues. And there was a third recommendation from the ECO working group that was based around strengthening public trust. This did not pass as a recommendation, but it did pass in the sense that the text was voted to be included in the annual report as part of the narrative that's included in that, in addition to recommendations. So it won't be a recommendation, but the core message is still going to be included in the annual report. And finally, the last recommendation that we had time to touch on at the September 16th meeting was the Mitigation Working Group's first recommendation around protecting SEEF. This recommendation was amended from its original text to an alternative text, which I think tried to find a middle ground between, as strongly as possible advocating for nobody touching SEEF funds, to recognizing that, SEEF is, still part of the state, and that there are times when sometimes, that money needs to be reallocated. So I think that was trying to find a middle ground between those 2 points, and that did pass with that alternative text. The remaining 8 recommendations are going to be deliberated starting at the October 1st meeting, and then if needed, we'll also continue that deliberation into November 4th, where I think the game is also to approve the annual report before it's submitted to the governor and the General Assembly on December 15th. So that's the update. I will be distributing this out to the commission this afternoon, and just as we did before the September 16th meeting, we'll be accepting advance amendments if anybody has anything that they want to add to the remaining recommendations that haven't been voted on yet, just to streamline that process and make it a little speedier when we get to the commission meeting. Thank you.
Any questions or comments for Jared? Yeah, maybe we all went through a different process to develop or write recommendations this year, and maybe from your perspective, Jared or Mark, did you find that worked out much better and much more? Did people end up writing tighter recommendations and less of them? And how was that working overall?
Yeah, I think that the Google Form system that we implemented this year has been really effective. We saw the recommendations come in with a much greater deal of consistency. Many of you have been on this working group for a number of years, and you've seen how there's been a lot of fluctuation in the size and the scope and the way that they're written generally between recommendations and working groups. And I think this year we found some consistency that I think has really made the process much smoother. I think that if we didn't have the system in place, I don't think we would have gotten through 8 in the first meeting. So
Great.
really happy with the progress we've made, and I hope that we can continue to improve this process next year.
Great. Any other comments, questions? We have a few commission members who are also members of the STWG. If Robin or Russ wanted to talk about the process, or Fernando, the floor is yours, or you could just pass. Up to you.
No, from my perspective, definitely kudos to MDE for helping us frame the recommendations in a much more concise and structured way. And I think that they make more sense when you read them, and they're also easy to discuss and easy to approve. So I think all those objectives have been achieved. And also, looking forward to the meeting on October 15th. We will be the format in which the discussion takes place is that the group that submits recommendations makes a kind of a quick pitch, a minute or so for each recommendation, and then there's discussion that commissioners. So I think we're in good shape to present our recommendations on October 15th, and I want to start thinking forward to the production of the science section of the annual report.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you, Fernando. So you just a couple notes on that. So the meeting is October 1st. So we have a little bit less time than that. And yeah, definitely would love to start collaborating on how we can start working on that update on the science that's included in that annual report. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
And just to be clear, that the draft of the science section for the annual report is not due on October 1st.
It is not. No.
Right. Yeah.
No.
Thank you.
I think,
sure.
and this is something that I'll need to confirm with commission leadership, but I believe the plan is to approve the annual report at the November 4th meeting. So I believe the hope is to have that section ready by that time. But we can confirm that with you once I've had that discussion with leadership.
Great. Thank you. Robin came off mute, so I think, Robin, do you have anything you'd want to add?
I would say I agree with the new format. It was much easier.
Great. Glad to hear it.
Good.
The efficiency was twice as good. So.
Yeah, and the plan that I'd like to propose for us on the October 1st meeting is that we have 4 recommendations. I think Russ, you can make the pitch for methane. I think you or Robin can make the pitch for the health. I can make the pitch for the joint study with Don if he's available and willing. And then we were counting on recruiting Eric Davidson to make the pitch for nitrous oxide.
Great. So Don and we'll make sure we get you the timing and the Zoom info, and we'll do the same for Eric Davidson.
What date is it?
October 1st, 1 o'clock, I believe.
Okay, say Fernando, you mentioned also the writing the brief narrative that we have in terms of the science. We usually cover kind of like the new developments and scientific understanding and so on. This year, as you know, is a very contentious year about climate science. And so it's going to be a challenge about how to be honest about that, but not getting into the debate itself. And I would just urge you to consider a brief mention of this latest National Academy's report.
I agree.
Engagement, because it says it very succinctly that we know 2009 they got it right. The evidence is even clearer, and so something like that. Now that we have a source, you don't have to use your own words. You could use the words of experts.
Yeah, we'll get a draft. Very simple talking points going for the group, and then we start beefing those up, and then we'll draft up the section that way.
So, and Eric came off. I see Rahat's got her hand up, but Eric came off camera, so I just wanted to give Eric an opportunity, if you were available October 1st, at least be there for the STWG portion. We could always text you guys, 5 minutes before when we might expect it to happen. So
We may not get to it. If anything, like how we got through, we spent a lot of time on the mitigation work group.
Right. That's true, and they are before us again. So, but that's why maybe texting too, if it's there is another meeting I think that's potentially on the books. I don't have that ready, but
November 4th was the final meeting where recommendations would be deliberated.
Oh, okay. I thought there was a second October one. Okay.
Yeah, no, but I'm betting that we'll get through ours on October 1st.
Yeah.
Maybe we can make a pitch to reverse the order if we're going to have some guests with us. But we could see if that's a possibility. Eric, did you want to say anything, or you just heard your name and?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, I sent you a message offline there. It'll be a bit of a challenge for me, but we'll do our best.
Okay, understand. Yep. He'll be traveling, Fernando.
And Russ, am I presenting the individual commissioner comment?
You're welcome to. Yes.
That'd be fine.
Yep.
Okay.
If you don't want,
we'll be there. We'll be there with you. So.
Okay.
Yeah. Rahat, did you want to? I think you were.
Yeah. You mentioned in the beginning. Talk to Alicia about helping out with presenting the methane recommendation.
It wasn't necessarily have her help. I think that Russ was questioning whether she saw the N2O recommendation.
All right. Okay.
And the concern there was that we got some MDA pushback. I say MDA. That's probably not fair. Some pushback from other members of the commission related to the methane recommendation last year. And I think Russ is making a good point that we might want to make sure that they've looked at the N2O recommendation carefully before we get to that meeting. And I don't think Alicia is on today's meeting, so I will follow up in an email to her on that.
Yeah, Dave, I think that's important because I think the recommendations we have are pretty simple cells, except for the N2O. People don't, they're familiar with methane, but they probably aren't thinking much about N2O. And this might be new to them. So
yeah,
kind of laying the groundwork would be helpful.
Right.
Yeah, I think I talked to Mike for a minute about it, and he just said, so your recommendation is a study and maybe a better budget. He said business is always in favor of more information. Of course, that's the first step toward regulation. And what Eric, why we need you is if somebody then says, all right, what are we going to do to improve agricultural practices to reduce N2O emissions, then we need a real expert there. And I'm not so comfortable with that. I can look it up, but.
and Eric, recognizing that you're traveling, you might want to just, if you don't mind, even throwing around some simple bullets that Russ, Robin, and Fernando could have at hand if you're not there.
Yeah, I could prepare talking points, or I could even prepare a brief recording if you want. But I guess you want to be able to respond to questions. So
yeah. But some talking points probably wouldn't hurt if you wouldn't mind.
Okay. Yeah, Eric and Dave, I'd just suggest, to keep it simple, to say this is the important greenhouse gas that's sort of been ignored, and then we have, a member of STWG, Dr. Davidson, has really led this global assessment. So it's not like we're starting from scratch. It's just bringing this down to what it means for Maryland. You don't need to.
Yeah, I guess the point would be that anthropogenic emissions are about the same as natural emissions, and among anthropogenic, agriculture dominates, and there are things you can do to reduce those emissions that don't necessarily, this is where Eric has to help, will they help profitability for the farmers or not? Or is it going to be?
Yeah, you can make that argument that by making more efficient use of fertilizers, farmers have to pay less for fertilizers. And then you end up losing less into the environment.
Right. And there's something to do with, I know how much flooding you have and how anaerobic you are determines whether you go to N2O or all the way to N2. But this is your field, Eric, not mine.
Right. Yeah. And Maryland has provided subsidies for farmers to put in drainage control structures on the eastern shore, which does a pretty good job of reducing the nitrogen nitrate that leaches out all the way to N2. And we've done research on that to have numbers to back that up. The problem there is that the state provides part of the funding for installing these drainage control structures, but not all of it. And the farmer still has to employ them and doesn't really have much incentive to do so. So not all of them that have been installed are being used effectively.
Okay. So, but in principle, this would protect water quality as well as climate, and maybe would be of benefit financially to the farmers. Okay.
And there are co-benefits to society of better water quality and in the bay and so on.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things I make, since it's on the minds of the agency heads now because of the new Chesapeake Bay Agreement that's being discussed, is that if we reduce the over-enrichment of the bay, we're also reducing the N2O emissions from the bay, which is not insignificant. And so that's a benefit of our other policies to to improve the bay water quality.
All right, Adele, and then we should probably move on after this because we're kind of relitigating it here.
Just to quickly, just follow up Eric's comment. Since 1980, there has been tremendous amount of research on controlled drainage, sub-irrigation sort of projects across this whole spectrum of East Coast, coastal, wherever there's high water table conditions. I have published several papers on that. So but everything comes together. So carbon, the bacteria needs basically carbon, favorable moisture conditions, which controlled drainage offers, even off-season. And then you have the nitrate converting to dinitrogen gas rather than, staying emitting as N2O. So there is ample amount of research that really is there, and control structures, Eric. I mean, they're supposed not to be too expensive. They're just these metal things, and then the rest is 2x4s that they stick in the ditch. So, I mean, we had a lot in Eastern North Carolina. We have done in Lower Eastern Shore that UMES, couple of people from UMES are working. My point is, this cost sharing shouldn't take much money. I'm not sure why MDA or whoever NRCS or Soil Conservation District offices, I thought that they were working with the farmers on that. They're very cheap. But anyway.
All right. Well, hopefully that's lower hanging fruit than some other fruit. The next agenda item is we want to discuss a little bit about nominations of new STWG members, and if there are areas of expertise that we really should build out more, or specific individuals from any sector. Thing we have in our pocket at this point. Just wanted to put it out there, for members to think about. We've been cleaning up our lists at the request of MDE, and we did note that there have been several STWG members who have moved out of the area and or formally left the group. So I pose that as kind of the background to this, and we don't need names now, you could email Fernando or I, and we could consider how that helps the makeup of the team, and work with MDE to fully understand the process. Would be helpful. So, but if you have ready names, and you want to put them out there, please do.
Dave, I have a question. Can we nominate people who haven't been in STWG?
Yeah, who have not been on here currently?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it will be good actually to identify.
We need some refresh, I guess, is the point. That we probably lost 3 or 4 individuals in the last couple of years without really increasing or replacing them. And this came up to MDE's attention, and they asked us to kind of work on, thinking about increasing membership. Ultimately, the secretary of MDE does the appointment, so there will be some level of vetting of the individual, probably, and then some sort of formal, you are now on the STWG letter.
I'm just, area, for example, you mentioned as an example, you all heard Stephanie Lansing, right? From an agricultural point of view, waste to energy, but also capturing methane and so on. And Stephanie Yarwood did on the methane from wetlands. But again, one type of those kinds of areas of need. In other words, we keep talking about agriculture. I'm a water guy, but I have touched to water quality, so I understand the biochemical processes and soils and all that. But my point is that people like that, so if the areas that we need, if that can be identified, then we can find people that really have done, extensive amount of research in that area and they're familiar.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. What areas were the prior people expert in?
Yeah, a couple of them were global, global climate change in policies and science. The names are escaping me right now.
That's not important.
But no, I know, right? So we had a couple of those other experts from that perspective. But I'll just put as an example. A few years ago, we had heard from the commission itself that they wanted more folks with that were more of the science, from the technical side of the science and technical work group, that we didn't have too many technical people on our work group. So we did some additions based on that, but that may not have been enough. So I don't necessarily want to prejudge, you guys, and thinking about what you're comfortable with and what you think we need as expertise moving forward.
Yeah, but one indication, for example, that you could use, one criteria is the 4 recommendations we're putting forward, right? Indicate, have some correlation with the areas of need.
Right.
So agriculture definitely stands out because it's something that none of us covers, and Adele already pointed it out, and it's in the nitrous oxide recommendation implicitly, and probably also in the others, right? So areas that we put forward could be a frame to identify people. Oh, and one more thing, I did touch base because the director of the Joint Global Change Research Institute was a member of the STWG from the time of Tony Janeros and then Ghasim Asrar, and then he left, and that hasn't been filled. And I did talk to Alan Fawcett, who is the new director of JECRI, and he's willing to do it. So I mean, I left it very non-committal just to have a first conversation, but he did bring up, however, that should be no surprise that because they're a joint venture between PNNL and University of Maryland. The PNNL side, which is Department of Energy, he said we needed to finesse it because this is a Commission on Climate Change, and he's technically a DOE employee. But he said that with his hat at the University of Maryland, he could do it.
Great. Mark, did you have wanted to provide some input for us?
Just a thought, you know, something that some of the other working groups have done to be a little bit more nimble than having to go through the whole process of appointing new permanent members to a working group. But when there are kind of like ad hoc topics that come up, they've sometimes formed subgroups to say, you know, for the next few months, we want to collect stakeholders on a certain topic. And you know, that can be open to anyone. They don't have to be appointed by the Secretary of MDE, right? But you can, you know, just keep on your menu of options the opportunity. If the STWG, almost as a steering committee, said, you know, it'd be great to have an expert group think about this specific topic and come back to us with a recommendation, you can stand up a subgroup of open membership, and you know, those people don't have to go through the formal appointment process.
That's a great reminder, because in essence, that's partly what we did about methane, you know, 12 to 24 months ago. And we had four or five different speakers, and they all sort of went to each other's talks for the most part, which was really good to see as well. So that's a good reminder, Mark.
Yeah, for this kind of committee, you really need some big thinkers who think across both adaptation, mitigation, you know, in an integrated way, not just in our own specialty. Because as Mark indicated, you could always bring those specialists in on a specific task.
Right, and I'm seeing a couple names in the chat, which is really really helpful. Well, some of the names that were removed, right? Sorry, but then there's one addition as well, Lars Peter, the ESSEC director.
Oh yeah.
His last name is Ricegaard or something, but
I'm sorry.
I'm mispronouncing it. So
yeah,
Danish last name. Yeah,
it's impossible. So just call him Lars Peter.
Lars Peters.
Yeah. Well, thanks.
He's a you know, has a good view from 30,000. I was going to say feet, maybe meters is more appropriate.
Would it be 10,000 meters? Anyway, well, great. I think, you know, as you know, and I don't think we have to do this as a full slate to MDE, but some communication, and I'm seeing some other additions in the chat, which is great. Some level of communication with the individual to make sure they'd be willing to do it as well is helpful. And so when we put that name forward, we know they're going to accept. And then if, you know, and while that's being adjudicated, they could certainly come and start participating in these meetings. Fernando, that ties up our agenda for today.
Great.
And did you know, I think we have to accept public comment if there is any. So any members of the public wish to provide any comments for us today? And you could raise your hand. We have a couple screens still, so I'm trying to manage that. Or maybe not, maybe it's, I don't see any public comment.
So as a member of the public, I wish everyone a great weekend and go out and have drinks and have fun. We had a great meeting today. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Really appreciate it, Mark, and really thanks for bringing both groups together. That was really great. It was enjoyable.
You all heard that Fernando said drink is on the house.
There you go.
Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
all. Yeah, appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.